Good evening. Welcome to Counterpoint here on KWSU Television. It's a new program. I think you're going to enjoy it. It features, first of all, Bill Hall, the editorial director of the Lewiston Morning Tribune, who also represents the liberal views, and Doug Wilson, the Idahonian Daily News, who generally represents the conservative views. Again, since this is a new program, I might tell you that I'm Glenn Johnson, and also that here's the way the program will work. We'll have commentaries from both gentlemen, and they'll respond to them, and then we'll open up the grab bag. First of all, here's Bill Hall.
There are days when Ronald Reagan and I can scarcely believe the irresponsibility of the American press. The president is upset because the press had the chronic gall to report to the people what the government is doing rather than what the government wanted people to think it was doing. What the government wanted the people to think it was doing was refusing to sell arms to Iran and making it against the law for anybody else to do it either. What the government was doing was selling arms to Iran. What the government wanted the people to think it was doing was leading the world in opposition to paying ransom to terrorists for hostages, lest terrorists be motivated to seize more hostages. What the government was actually doing was paying ransom. It was swapping arms for hostages. But there would never have been any trouble with the American people over it if those busybodies in the press hadn't thinked. Why can't American reporters be more patriotic? Why can't they be more like the reporters in the Soviet Union and help their government keep distressing facts tucked away someplace where they won't upset the people? But no, American reporters are a bunch of tattletales. If they learn that the government is quietly doing the opposite of what it says it is doing, they have to spill the beans. The president tells us he is frustrated and angered by the irresponsibility of the press in this matter, and small wonder. Who do these reporters think they are to be doing what we pay them to do? Why do reporters insist on reporting? Why do they have to be such know-it-alls and tell us what's going on all the time? From what I've heard lately, I'm just like the president. I don't want to know what's going on, especially the bad stuff. You start letting reporters tell us with any regularity what's really going on inside the government, and it's just going to depress everybody. It certainly depresses me and the president. If you're a reporter and you know about some bad stuff inside our government, why don't you just shut up? Doug?
Bill, it's one thing to be critical of the NSC and their activities in Iran and elsewhere. It's quite another to artificially set the NSC over against the press and pretend the press is somehow suddenly responsible simply by virtue of the fact that the NSC was irresponsible. It is quite within the press's capabilities to be utterly irresponsible about someone else's irresponsibility. And it's pretty clear that that's what they've done. The piranhas in the press have seen a fat cow crossing the Amazon River, and they think they're going to have their day, and so far they're having their day. But what crime has Oliver North committed? We don't know. It's not a question of the press reporting on the facts. It's a question of the press speculating about a lot of things that they don't know about, and we are fed a bunch of misinformation, much of it coming from the press, not all of it from the governmental authorities.
Well, first of all, no information comes ultimately from the press. It comes from sources who speak to the press, and most of those are inside the White House these days, but I agree that's a usually unreliable source.
Now, are you prepared to tell me that the press has behaved with decorum throughout this entire affair?
Well, this is typical of you, Doug, talking about the press. You know, we don't all
the Washington
walk in
Post.
lockstep. The Washington Post, Lewiston Tribune. The Lewiston Tribune, I think, has behaved most responsibly in this matter because we have told people what's going on inside the government.
I'm glad to hear it. Now, how do you know that this is what's gone on inside the government?
Well, granted, I don't have your pipeline to God, so I don't know with certainty everything that goes on in the universe, but I think I know what's going on. I think I'm with that 10% of the American people who believe Ronald Reagan is truthful when he says he didn't know what the hell was going on inside his own government.
Now, let me get this right. You think you know what happened throughout this whole thing, and your paper has reported on that.
My paper has reported what the Washington Post, what the Associated Press has had to say on this, what Ronald Reagan's defenders have had to say on this.
In other words,
and my paper has said on the editorial page who it thinks is telling the truth and who it thinks isn't.
In other words, a lot of speculation. Some facts, a lot of speculation.
Well, I know speculation is very untidy to the Christian mind, but we have to do some of that once in a while.
And now it's Doug Wilson's turn.
What does it mean to be a defender of the free market system? It is nothing less than a defense of the creation of wealth. Anyone who has ever spent any time looking at his checkbook knows that money leaves more quickly than it comes. It is easier to squander wealth than to create it. But the fact that something is easy does not mean that it is healthy. How does this relate to the free market system? The conservative emphasizes the production and protection of wealth. Wealth is produced when the government stays out of the way of free men operating in a free market. Wealth is protected when the government fulfills its legitimate function of both domestic and international defense. The liberal lawmaker, in contrast, approaches all economic questions with the attitude of a consumer, not a producer, not a protector. This means that there's no way to restrain a thoughtless plunge into government subsidies, programs, and whatnot. This approach works well as long as there is capital to consume. The liberal approach to government resembles a dissolute son of a multimillionaire. He excels at squandering, but has little idea of how the wealth was created in the first place. Some may object that I'm being unfair to the liberal position. In support of this objection, they could point to the many wealthy welfare states. But this misses the point. They cannot point to any society that became wealthy in this fashion. No country has been able to spend itself rich, although there's been no shortage of countries in the third world attempting it. In the same way, there are plenty of dissolute sons of millionaires spending themselves into poverty. While they are doing it, they can kid themselves and say that their lifestyle works. Just one problem. It doesn't. Bill?
Well, of course I'm interested in the consumer point of view. I'm more a giver than a taker in the society, unfortunately. And you tend to become a strong consumer when you get gouged a couple times. For instance, I pulled into a service station in Moscow the other day, filled up the tank, gave them my money, and then stupidly asked if they had a bathroom, and of course they didn't. That's what turns you into an activist. You know, I will not only vote for, but beatify the first legislator who introduces a bill to require that they post no restrooms outside those rip-off factories.
So what you're advocating is a federal program requiring restrooms in gas stations? Is that the...
No, I'm advocating a federal or a state program. I'll start small, state, city, whatever, requiring they simply have a little truth in packaging. Or unpackaging in this case, that they put a sign out front saying either no restrooms or rude people running this station outside. Just some warning. You're traveling across country, you need to empty the tank as well as fill it.
Now, what does this have to do with the creation of wealth as opposed to the consumption of it?
Well, we were attacking consumers for the rotten thing of being consumers.
No.
For focusing, liberals focusing on the protection of the consumer as opposed to making Ivan Boesky even richer. Talk about creating something. What did he ever create besides a stack of worthless paper?
Wealth is not created in order to stack it up in great big piles and then admire it from afar. That's not what you're doing. Wealth is created in order that it may be utilized. But there's a problem when people start to consume more than they produce. That's what I'm attacking when I'm talking about the consumer mentality, where you think that you have somehow a right to consume more than is produced. The liberal approach to government is to spend more than you have, live outside your limits. Let's not have a constitutional amendment to balance the budget, because we can write checks that will bounce. No big deal, no problem. That's the consumer mentality.
When we keep trying to get involved in war in the Middle East and places like that, we're proposing to spend more than we have.
When the government is dealing with matters of defense, the government is addressing something that the Constitution gives them the right to address. But when you're talking about the redistribution of wealth, when you're talking about all the things that the government is currently involved in, you're not dealing with a constitutional mandate at all.
I know you worship God and money, but I didn't know you also worship the military.
No, nothing to do with the military at all. It's simply that is something to do with the military, but it's nothing to do with just defending the military. What I'm saying is that the military defense is a legitimate function of government.
In the fire department and public schools.
Well, fire department, okay. Public schools, no.
Time now for our grab bag section of Counterpoint for this December 11th. And here's our first question. We'll direct it to Doug. The 4Q T-shirt caused quite a bit of controversy in the Pullman High School district and in the community. Should the school have the right to tell, in this case, the students what to wear? Or is it taking away the students' right to express themselves? Remember that Fork Me T-shirts were ruled okay by the school, primarily the principal.
Well, the problem that you have here is intellectual schizophrenia. You have people trying to apply some kind of standard where they don't have any real basis for the standard. I applaud any attempt to draw the line, and I think it's important for us to realize that if you try to draw the line and there's a big outcry against this attempt at setting a standard, it simply illustrates the fact that you need a more solid footing if you're going to try and draw the line in the future. I don't think the public schools are capable of successfully setting up any kind of meaningful standard of free expression. They certainly have the right to, but I don't think they're going to be able to.
You've really asked two questions, Glenn, and that's whether they should draw the line and whether they should have in this case. In this case, I think no. I think there comes a time when a principal should try to get his blood pressure under control and when in doubt, butt out, and not cause the stir that the principal caused, in this case, not the T-shirts. But as to whether a public school district or any place else has the right to draw some lines, I'm a tad conservative on this one. I hate to disappoint you. I believe that the way I defend my right to watch pornography, to say naughty things in the privacy of my own home, is to regard it as a two-way street and protect some little old lady from seeing some smart aleck from Pullman High School walking down the street rubbing his and Bill Hall's immorality in her face. I think it's a two-way street, and the principal should draw the line, but in this case, it was ridiculous.
Now, are you saying that it would be good for these students to show self-restraint, or are you saying that it is legitimate for the school system to say that is a no-go?
I think it is legitimate for the school system to say that is a no-go.
Now, if there's any kind of student resistance at all or outcry against this decision when it's made, should this administration immediately capitulate?
The administration should immediately deal with them. Should have a little due process of law first, and if due process of law, a hearing indicates that they did indeed rub their views into someone else's nose uninvited, if they are imposing on others, then I would chuck them out or whatever is indicated.
I think the ACLU said disrupt classes is what the handbook said, and would you go that far?
Well, first of all, yes, I would say if it's disruptive, but what is disruptive? That brings up a new question. I don't think it's disruptive to say something that would upset two timid young people in the room who didn't want to make an ass of themselves and mention it. I don't think you have the right to upset them. You know, when you get in a congregation of varied people in a homogeneous society, you've got to show a little restraint in both directions. I told you I was conservative on this.
The fact that people say that T-shirts like this are not disruptive to the educational process simply illustrates how few people have any idea of what the educational process involves.
But let me tell you the real reason this was done. It had nothing to do with the language. It had to do with the fact that the football team is the pet of every dimwit school administrator in this country half the time. And this shirt was really aimed at the football team and the lack of funding for another team, as I understand it. So this was another public school administrator running for cover and trying to protect his babies on the football team.
So what you're saying is opposition to obscenity, explicit or implicit, is really a defense of football. Is that right?
Well, in this case, it was.
Well, we'll move away from sacred sports and hit the next topic, an international one. SALT II treaty was purposely violated by the United States. Will the Russians ignore it, or are we forcing them into a position so they will have to break treaties in order to keep up? In essence, have we started a whole new arms race, Bill?
Oh, I'm really kind of a cynic on this one. I think both President Reagan and the leader of Russia are lying when they say they're anxious to drop a lot of different arms. I think the only hope, I don't think they're going to disarm tomorrow. I think that's just window dressing, just their PR at work. I think what they really do want is to try to get some agreement on trimming the expense of these weapons. I think there is some mutual need on both sides to keep from spending the Soviet Union and the United States to death, and that's why there may be some sincerity on trying to at least avoid the next level of expenditure on these monstrously expensive weapons.
Our violation of the limits of SALT II, as far as I can see, the only thing wrong with it was that it was many years too late. We should have been doing it a long time ago. I applaud what the president has done in going over the limits of SALT II. Anybody who says, well, that means that the Soviets will then be forced to violate the treaty, it's nonsense. The Soviets have been violating the treaty all along.
Oh, and two wrongs make a right. Now, see, I'm not going to go that wacky on it. I say I'm a little bit cynical on it.
Yeah,
but that doesn't mean that I wouldn't love to be proven wrong and that they shouldn't try, and you should wish that they should try, too.
Look, it makes sense to make a fishing treaty with Canada. That makes sense, because we're going to keep the treaty, they're going to keep the treaty, and if there's any conflicts, you can work it out.
Well, wait a minute, I'm from timber country. I don't trust the Canadians as much as you do, but go ahead. You look like a Canadian, if I may say so.
Well, my mother was.
Now rest el queso.
The point I'm trying to make is that the Soviets are in a different ballpark altogether. It's one thing to make a treaty with...
The evil empire.
That's right, they're an evil empire.
Yeah, and we're Mr. Clean, right?
Well, comparatively, we keep our word,
comparatively,
and they do not. The point is that the only legitimate reason that I can see for negotiating with the Soviets at all is that it keeps diplomats off the streets. where there might be real damage.
I'm for that.
I am too. Next question. When an animal attacks or kills, they are usually put to death to make sure they never do it again. Shouldn't we use capital punishment to make sure the most vicious animals of all, humans, don't kill again?
I believe that capital punishment is something that our society should do, but I don't think we should do it for deterrent effect, and I don't even think we should do it to keep them from doing it again. I think we should do it because it is the just and right thing to do. When someone takes someone else's life, when someone does something that is heinous and just a gross violation of all civilized standards, like murder, I believe they should die after they've been given a fair trial, due process of law. They should die because they deserve to die. Now, I believe that it will have a deterrent effect, and it will have a beneficial result in society as a whole. They're not going to go out and do the same thing again, but that's not the prime reason you're doing it.
Well, I could buy one argument for capital punishment. I can't buy the get even one, the God's judgment one, because that means that I am becoming like an animal. We all have animal appetites in some ways. I don't want to discuss which are my favorites. But we go through lives trying to be civilized and trying to control those, and one of those is not to kill each other. And you don't teach killers the evils of killing by killing them. Not only that, but the one argument that tempts me on capital punishment is these wackos are better off dead. That's a pretty tempting argument. That's the first step to abortion, Doug Wilson.
Except that with capital punishment, you're executing the guilty after they've had a fair trial. With abortion, you're executing the innocent with no trial at all. So you're talking about apples and oranges there.
That's not true. I hear people say all the time, well, they're better off dead. But I respect those people more than I do you, to tell you the truth, because at least they're trying to find some good, kind reason to off another member of the human race.
Behind the statement, they're better off dead, still lies the rehabilitative theory, the rehabilitative approach to law, where you have to make them better, where our courts are simply places where we practice
That's nonsense.
medicine.
I have very little hope for rehabilitating a hardened multiple murderer. I recognize them as a mentally ill person. They should be stashed away until they're old and toothless, and then maybe we let them out.
Now, when you say things like that, you have to ignore the basic criterion of justice, and that is when someone does something to someone else, they deserve to have the same thing done to them. When the government does it, they're ensuring that justice is done as opposed to personal vengeance. If the government does not levy just penalties, what's going to happen is vigilante justice is going to start taking over. You're going to start having Bernard Goetz's
Really,
there's
deterrence and then there's deterrence. There's to deter a murderer, to have someone say, you people believe, that somebody stops the dagger in mid-stroke and says, my goodness, this is a capital punishment state, I shall not do this. There's no deterrence there. These are crimes of passion. There is deterrence with an Ivan Boesky or with a Lieutenant Colonel Oliver North. I believe in deterrence for those crimes.
But I wasn't arguing for deterrence. I was arguing for justice.
Well, you said you believe there is deterrence.
I believe that does happen, but it's a byproduct
Justice
of what you're
is
doing.
mine, saith the Lord.
You mentioned earlier due process.
He's quoting the Bible.
Yeah.
We better make a note of that.
All right.
But you mentioned earlier due process. How far does that due process go? Does it go through the hearing, the trial, found guilty? What about all those appeals that we keep hearing about all the way down the line? Like we say with Ted Bundy.
That's an interesting question, because our Constitution gives us the right to trial by jury. The founding fathers of our country wanted big decisions like that to be kept out of the hands of legal professionals. They didn't want the lawyers and the judges to have sole responsibility for this.
Sole responsibility. They didn't want to kept out of their hands. You said it more accurately the second time.
They have something to do with it, but they wanted a trial by jury because they wanted the layman to make decisions of this magnitude. And I believe that the appeals process is a way of circumventing that. So where someone gets a trial by jury and then it gets bumped up into the appellate level, it goes all the way up, what you've done is simply made a trial by jury the first step. And I think that's an unconstitutional approach.
Well, let's admit that the appellate system is greatly abused, but let's not do away with it. There's another criticism I would have of what's happening in these trials, whether we snuff them in the Christian way or not when we get through with the trial. And that's, I don't see how the state of California, for instance, can defend a 1.5-year-long murder trial. Now, granted, lawyers are a little windy, but that is ridiculous, and this whole society will come grinding to a close if we allow murder trials any trials to go on that long. How many trials can you have each year in the
No
local courthouse?
No argument there.
Well, I think we'll bring this particular question to a snuffed end, so to speak. Bill, this is your question from the grab bag. Abortion is a woman's right. This is what the National Women's Organizations say. Yet there's an increasing faction on the right that says otherwise. Is it a woman's right?
Well, it's a matter of when the abortion occurs. I know in my own heart that there's nothing wrong with aborting a fertilized undivided egg. I know in my own heart there's something wrong with aborting a 9-month fetus. And you have to draw the line in there somewhere in between, I think, and this, for lack of a better answer, I think the Supreme Court's answer is the best. But I don't know what the right answer is in that case, and when I don't know, I'm inclined to butt out and leave it up to the individual, especially in moral matters.
Now, you used the phrase, "I know in my own heart," twice there. Is that your appeal to authority? Is that the authority? Is that how we determine whether an unborn child is in fact a person?
No, that's my appeal to the judge in my mirror each morning. I don't know for a fact, and you don't know for a fact, any of these questions. These are questions beyond fact. These are questions better read with our hearts than with our steely little eyes.
Now, but if your heart reads one way and my heart reads another, now what do we do?
Then government should butt out.
Okay, now, if...
Assuming we're both sane, you know, if a murderer thinks there's nothing wrong with murder, we have to draw a line on that.
Okay, why do we have to draw a line there? Why?
Because society is an almost unanimous agreement that murder is wrong. And society is not an almost... Let me finish your argument for you.
All right.
Did you see him? He wanted to leap on that one. Thought, oh, this is a hot one, and he was wrong again. There is great disagreement in the society. Indeed, by most of the polls I see, you are in the minority on this question. And I don't see how the minority can, using the power of the state, cramming its religious views as opposed to general moral, ethical views down the...
Is that how we determine what we ought to do, by counting noses and then promulgating it afterwards with a billy club, as Mencken said?
You're correct that you cannot decide some matters by, like whether we have a continuous jury trial, whether someone gets a jury trial by majority vote. But nonetheless, the question was what made murder wrong, and that was that everybody agrees murder is wrong in every society. Not everyone agrees that abortion is wrong.
That's just simply false. In our society, we don't agree about what is and is not murder, and we don't agree to the tune of over 1 million unborn children a year.
There are some forms of murder we do all agree on.
Okay, now, but there's increasing disagreement about that. In Nazi Germany, there was disagreement about it.
I said sane people.
Well, what's your standard for determining sanity? It seems that what you are is you're in this relativistic ocean in a rowboat.
I say murderers,
rowing around
Nazis, and some addled ministers are skating on thin ice.
Look, what these addled ministers have is a standard to appeal to.
So we addled ministers.
What you have is a statement I know in my own heart, which begs the question, under debate, is whether or not the unborn child is a person with legal rights.
Doug, I don't speak to God. I don't know these matters. He hasn't told me the way he has you.
Okay, so how do you...
There's some things I don't know the answer to. Now, you find that disingenuous, I know, but I really don't know where I would draw the line. But I do know that egg isn't a poison.
But you do know, let's say, for a 1-month-old child after birth is a person with legal rights.
Would you arrest someone for offing a 9-month fetus?
I believe that doctors who take the life of an unborn child, the doctors knowing what they're doing, are guilty of murder.
How about if they invent and give you the night of conception and after diddlement and we abort that egg?
Now, the point that I'm making is this.
Would you arrest that doctor?
I believe it ought to be against the law to do that sort of thing.
The answer is yes.
Where you're preventing the implantation of a fertilized egg. That ought to be illegal. With a woman who's been lied to...
You're against birth control.
Certain forms of birth control. Certain forms of birth control...
Your forms are okay and mine aren't.
No. The point is, are you dealing with a human life or not?
That's a good question. I agree.
If you are, then it's not a question of birth control. If you're not, then it's a question of birth control that's to be left up to people's individual decision.
I can only prove to myself, to the judge in my mirror in the morning, in my own heart, that a 9-month fetus is a person and a fertilized undivided egg is not.
Okay, now what do we do? What do we do with the 8.5-month-old unborn child? What do we do with the 8-month-old?
We try to come to a consensus of the society through the court system, exactly what we've done, and that's good enough for me.
And this might be a good point to throw another question here from the grab bag. This one goes to Doug first. Ed Meese is proposing a 7-point crackdown on pornography. Isn't this really a form of censorship?
Well, you bet it's a form of censorship. Of course it's a form of censorship. But where do we get this idea that censorship is always and everywhere wrong and evil? There are certain things that ought to be censored, and there's certain things that shouldn't be. What we've done is we've turned the First Amendment on its head. The First Amendment was written and designed to protect people who were freely expressing their opinions about this governmental program or that particular figure, and it wanted to allow for that freedom of responsible criticism. Now, what we now have is pornographic magazines who are assaulting every standard of civilized behavior known. It has nothing whatever to do with responsible political discourse, the sort of thing the First Amendment was designed to protect. And they are claiming the First Amendment, and they are trying to shut down the people who are opposed to pornography, who are exercising their First Amendment rights, and saying that these people are the enemies of freedom of the press or freedom of speech.
Well, I've already played the Puritan and said that I don't approve of those sanctimonious little twits at Pullman High School running around shoving their dirty words in little old ladies' faces. So I guess that licenses me to defend the pornographers. I don't defend the pornographers. I defend my own castle. You butt out of my own castle. I'm an adult. I'll read and view in that and do in that what I please.
Now, the government should not be butting into the private lives of individuals. What the enemies of pornography are trying to address is
trying to keep them from having the literature and the tapes and things to do what they please. You don't mind they're doing what they please in their own house as long as they don't get it from outside their own house.
Yes, so long as it's not something that is contaminating the society at large. Sure.
It's okay to contaminate yourself?
Well, there's certain things that the government should not get involved in. The government should not legislate against sins. The government should not have a lust police. The government should not try and get inside somebody's mind.
Do you believe I should have the right to rent the video of Deep Throat and bring it into my house?
I don't believe so, no.
We have time for just one more question, so we'll have to have some quick answers on this one. Bill, Washington State University's decision to divest South African stock, was it wise or was it foolish?
I think it was a nice vote of confidence in democracy and letting those people go in South Africa, letting them have some freedom.
It was wise for WSU. It was the politically expedient thing to do, particularly since you're dealing with, particularly since the lives you ruin are on the other side of the world.
Especially since the lives you ruin are white.
It has nothing to do with the lives you ruin are white. The chieftain of the Zulus has been stumping around America trying to talk people out of disinvesting because he's the head of millions of blacks in South Africa. He's opposed to it. He's a far greater constituency than Bishop Tutu, but the press doesn't give any coverage.
You know, you're a Tory. If you'd been around during the Revolution, you would have wondered what the hell Lafayette was doing over here instead of getting over to the Soviet.
Good evening. Welcome to Counterpoint here on KWSU for Thursday, January 8th. In case you missed this program last month when we debuted, we featured two lively spokespeople, one representing the conservative view, the other the liberal view. On this program, you'll meet Doug Wilson, a Moscow minister who writes for the Daily News Idahonian and represents the conservative standpoint, and Bill Hall, the editorial page editor for the Lewiston Morning Tribune, who is known for his liberal opinions. The format of the program works like this. We'll start out with an opinion piece with a response from the other person, and then about midway through the program, we'll go to the grab bag of current topics. But first, let's start out now with Doug Wilson.
There's one criticism of Ronald Reagan's domestic policies that is fundamentally sound. It is a pity that liberals have trouble making the criticism with a straight face. The president just offered his latest budget, and it is the first one to come in over $1 trillion. Imagine, we have the most conservative president since Calvin Coolidge presiding over a budget the size of a rock star's ego. Needless to say, the deficit is correspondingly large. The irony is that people like Bill Hall are in a fix. How are they to beat the president with the deficit stick and at the same time preserve their right to have one twice as big when they get in office? The big spending programs that began with the New Deal set our runaway car in motion. Subsequent administrations only made things worse. Finally, in reaction, the people elected Ronald Reagan. His tentative attempts to tap the brakes have obviously not done the trick, particularly since the Democratic House majority in the back seat has not hesitated to express its opinion of the driving. The brakes need slamming, but liberals regard any use of the brakes as a crime against humanity, street people, and social workers. So the question that needs to be presented to liberals in general, and Bill Hall in particular, is this. Are deficits bad, and why did they become a problem only in 1980? Bill?
Some deficits are bad and some aren't, Doug.
Republican deficits are bad and Democratic deficits are good.
No, little deficits are tolerable as they are in your life. I presume you have a mortgage on your house, most of us do. But there is such a thing as too much. There is such a thing as a deficit that can be so overpowering that it has an effect on interest rates, and these deficits that we're building up are going to have an effect on interest rates.
Believe me, I'm not defending this deficit, but I'm not defending the little ones. I'm just wondering why the liberals thought for so many years that it was all right to be a little bit pregnant, and then when the bloated bureaucracy gets to the point where it is now, consuming all the wealth that it is now, all of a sudden it's a Republican problem. They don't seem to be taking responsibility for all the years that it took to get us into this fix.
Well, I'll admit I have a personal problem. Every time Ronald Reagan convinces me of something and I start beating that drum, he abandons me. And he convinced me a few years ago that these high federal deficits were going to result in a lot of federal borrowing, and that's going to eventually drive interest rates back up again. I believe that. He obviously doesn't. But what else is new? He also convinced me that it was wrong to trade for hostages, to bargain for hostages, and I started beating that drum, writing those editorials, and he ran out on me on that one, too.
Somehow I have trouble imagining you as a disciple of Ronald Reagan's, convinced by him of certain issues and then abandoned by him.
Well, there's a couple other things I agree with him on, but I'm not going to say what they are, because the minute I start agreeing with him, he's going to abandon those, too.
But it's very clear that the deficits are bad for the economy, big deficits and little deficits. The point that I'm making is that if you have this runaway car heading toward the cliff, you can't change drivers at the last minute and then blame the last driver for going over the cliff. You have to look at everyone that got us into this position and the criticism of the people who are in the back seat saying, well, Ronald Reagan can't touch this social program, can't touch this one, this one, this one, this one. Everybody agrees in principle that deficits are bad, but nobody wants to face up to particular hard choices that need to be made in order to bring it down.
Oh, I think you can face up to choices. I think you can pick some of this and some of that. You can use your brain. I would you'll notice that there was no decrease in military spending in this budget. Was it 24 billion more this time? That man knows how to spend money. As a liberal, I take my hat off to that big spender.
When you're dealing with the military, you're dealing with something that is constitutionally given to the federal government to do. All the social programs are not given to the federal government to do. Now, that doesn't mean that there is no fraud and waste in the military. There is, and that should be attacked, but it shouldn't be attacked by saying that the government has no role doing that.
It is not given to the military to hire limousines and with drivers for all these generals and admirals at the Pentagon, is it?
Nor is it given to the military to buy $600 coffee pots or whatever it has been. And that sort of thing needs to be found out about, and
we all know you can go into almost any bureaucracy in Washington and find some fat in it. And
some fat.
Ronald Reagan
trying to find some meat in it.
Ronald Reagan believes there is no fat in the military budget. He keeps increasing it, and that's ludicrous on the face of it.
No, all the fraudulent things that were happening in the procurement proceedings and stuff were uncovered under the Reagan administration. Now, what happens is
that sort of thing has been going on for 40 years under both administrations. You may have just discovered it. The president may just have discovered it.
The most recent wave, the thing that caused all the problems. The thing that we have to realize is that if someone is pro-defense and at the same time opposed to waste, and they attack the waste, the things they uncover are going to be used as evidence against them when they try to say we need to...
I don't blame him for that. I don't even blame him for believing 6 years ago that you could have you could trim down the deficits without raising taxes or cutting the military. But after 6 years of this fairy tale, this poppycock that not cutting taxes is going to stimulate the economy and produce even more revenue, it hasn't happened. It's not going to happen. He has beaten a good idea to death.
Now, what he did is he got between the hogs and the bucket. He said, I'm gonna.
Are you kidding? Those hogs in the Pentagon ran all over him, and the bucket too.
No. What you have is this: people need to know that taxes are not going to increase, and then Congress is forced to face up to their wasteful spending. And that's what they're doing now. The pressure's on them, the heat's on them.
We've had for 6 years now a lot of cutting of the domestic program. It's about time those bloated fat cats in the Pentagon had their share.
If you have a 400-pound man who's gaining 20 pounds a week, and then he gets to the point where he's only gaining 15 pounds a week, he's not losing weight.
Well, some of these
He's only
programs,
gaining weight more
the proposal
slowly.
on this latest budget is to cut some of these programs, including student aid, including aid for handicapped students. This man is really rough on handicapped students, but on generals and admirals, he's a pussycat. So are you, Doug.
Now that we've gone in the debt on that subject, let's hear from Bill Hall.
The question for this society is not whether there should be secular prayers in the public schools. The question is whether the First Amendment should be taught in the churches and whether it should be required reading in the preacher schools. Lord knows there is a great ignorance of that amendment among many of those ministers who want to establish religion by imposing official prayers on all our children. But that, say the courts, the Constitution will not allow, and thank goodness. Ours is a pluralistic society, as in plural, more than one, as in many religions. The courts and common sense tell us that the founders intended that we and our children should be free, without state interference, to practice almost any religion or to practice none. That's why daily state-sanctioned prayers have been thrown out of the public schools, and that's why it is plain that those ministers and politicians trying to restore state-sponsored prayer are either ignorant of the First Amendment or in blatant disagreement with it. Let's not kid ourselves. It is not Jewish prayers they seek to establish in the classroom, though many of us in this land are Jews. It is not Muslim prayers they want, though more and more of us are Muslims. And it is certainly not the prayers of the Jehovah's Witnesses they seek to establish, because the witnesses understand the First Amendment as well as any congregation, and they are faithfully opposed to these risky linkages of church and state. It is solely Christian prayers they seek to establish in the schools of a people who are not all Christians. And if the truth be known, it is primarily Protestant prayers they want crammed down the throats of your children and my grandchildren, whether they are Protestants or not. That's the way it was when last we had official prayers in the public schools, and that's the way it will be again if these intrusive ministers ever succeed in removing the guarantee of religious freedom from the First Amendment. I use the term official prayers in the public schools for a reason, because prayer is not prohibited in these schools. Any child is free at any time to bow his head at his desk and silently solicit the attention of his family's version of the Almighty. And let us hope that when that sweet child of a blessedly pluralistic nation does bow his head, that he will ask the Almighty's help in filling ignorant ministers with a great yearning to pick up the First Amendment and try, for once, to understand what it says and what it truly means. Doug?
There are two reasons for opposing prayer in the public schools, but unfortunately for your case, neither one of them has to do with the First Amendment. The first is that public schools, if given responsibility for overseeing prayer, might do to prayer what they've done to literacy, that is, destroy it. The second thing is that you're correct. In a pluralistic society, there's an inconsistency between a monolithic state system and the pluralistic beliefs of the children who attend that school. But that is an argument against the existence of public schools, not an argument against prayer in school. So what you have is a very clear statement that, well, I have a high view of prayer and a low view of public schools. You apparently have a high view of the schools and a isolationist view of the prayers.
Yes, I do, and I'll pray for you and your view. I'll tell you, Doug, what really bothers me about having prayers in the public schools is the obvious consequence. The dominant religion in each community is going to be the one that writes those prayers.
Sure, that's an argument against public schools.
Yeah, you're going, well, I thought we would kind of deal here more with reality rather than some of your fanciful notions. But we have the Mormons writing the prayers in Mormon sections of the country. The Catholics would write the prayers in Boston. The agnostics would write the prayers in northern Idaho, where there are a lot of wicked people.
I'm interested in something that you said in your commentary. You used the ignorance of the First Amendment. You referred to that twice, and you referred to the founders' intent. It's curious that at the time the First Amendment was written, a number of the individual states had established churches. They didn't want a national church, but a number of the states had state churches.
It's also curious that the Puritans came to this country to escape religious persecution and immediately instituted it themselves.
You can object to that.
But Tom Jefferson and a couple other people got things straightened out between your state religions you mentioned and
no,
the actual United States of America.
Thomas Jefferson
and pray for.
Thomas Jefferson did that for Virginia, but there were established churches as late as 1830.
A lot of what Thomas Jefferson did for Virginia came to be imposed on the rest of us, thank goodness. And there were prayers in the schools as recently as the 1960s in this country. That doesn't mean that just because you write a brilliant constitution that you get all these public officials straightened out overnight. With this wonderful Supreme Court we have made this country finally start recognizing what the Constitution says on religious freedom.
I want you to admit that your case against prayer in the public schools has nothing to do with the First Amendment. It's a good case. I think there is an inconsistency between a public school system and a pluralistic society imposing prayers on the people who are the minority. That's a good case. But why don't you make that case without referring to the intent of the framers, because that has nothing to do with it. Public schools didn't exist as we know them at that time.
It most certainly does. What the framers had in mind was the establishment of religion, using the power of the state to establish a religion.
A national religion.
Yes, to establish a national religion, if you like.
The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. The only entity capable of breaking the First Amendment or violating it in the sense of the framers was Congress.
The courts have repeatedly held that which Congress cannot do, subjugate black people. The states can't do either, so that's a baseless argument.
They've utilized the 14th Amendment in order to do that, but that is a violation not only of the First, but of the 14th.
The state's foremost propagandistic tool is the public schools. It is the strongest propagandistic arm of the states. This does indeed have to do with the Constitution. We're getting awfully legalistic here.
Well, we're talking about the law.
Just trying to avoid the horrifying fact that you agree with me in part on this.
No, I think you ought to use your legitimate arguments to buttress your point and not drag in something that's completely superfluous to it. The intent of the framers or the writers of the First Amendment has nothing to do with prayer in the public schools.
What's illegitimate to you is legitimate to me.
Now time for the grab bag section of Counterpoint, which we go to all the current topics that are in the news. Incidentally, if you'd like to contribute some ideas for these two gentlemen to discuss, you can send your ideas to Counterpoint, KWSU-TV, Murrow Communications Center, Pullman, Washington, 99164. Well, here's our first question. We'll start with Bill. Cedric Staniford, the 36-year-old black man who survived a deadly racial attack by a white gang in New York this past weekend, now refuses to cooperate with prosecutors. He says investigators aren't interested in hearing his side of the story, the black side of the story. Are we really making progress in combating racism in this country, Bill?
Yes, I think we're making more progress than he thinks we are. I can understand why someone would be dubious. Not all policemen in this society and prosecutors are perfect anymore. But if there's any place in America where you will have fairness in carrying out the law, both to the accused and to the victim, it is New York, where the mayor of that city, its entire city council, part of which is black, just utterly mortified by this and very, very distraught. I mean, they feel terrible about it, and they're going to give it and justice their best shot. I think his fears are misplaced.
I think they're misplaced for a reason, and that reason is that for the last 20 years, we've had so many charges of institutional racism that we've forgotten what the genuine article is like, what real racism is like. And this young man, apparently the victim of real racism, is making false accusations and pointing fingers in the wrong direction.
There is a tendency among minorities to overstate the case and to engage in injustice themselves. And the only thing worse than being a bigot, or the only thing as bad as being a bigot, is accusing someone of being a bigot when he isn't. And this young man is doing that with the entire city of New York. I think he's wrong.
I heard one time, too, right when this happened, the mayor said we expect this to happen down the South. Southern newspaper editors got all upset, and one of them even called the mayor of New York a Jew. So that still talks about racism, alive and well in the country.
Oh, sure, yeah, but it's nothing peculiar to New York, nor that neighborhood in New York. I don't know what percentage it is. 10, 15% of the people anymore are redneck idiots on this question, and it's something that 100 years and a few more funerals will take care of.
Okay, Doug, we're going to go to you on this one. Washington motorists can now receive tickets to the tune of $47 for not wearing a seatbelt. What once was just a good idea in some eyes is now required by law. Is it right to require motorists to wear seatbelts, or does this infringe heavily upon our rights?
It is right for your mother to insist that you wear your seatbelt, and the mother of my children insists that our children wear their seatbelt, as do I. Wearing seatbelts is a good idea, but the state is not your mother.
I think your mother would probably want the state to require you to wear a seatbelt, but I don't, to tell you the truth. I think that the state cannot tell you to protect yourself unless not protecting yourself may lead to harm to others. And it's kind of a gray area there on that. If you wipe yourself out against a telephone pole because you didn't have a seatbelt on, society's going to have to pick up part of that tab. But I agree that that's reaching a little bit. On the other hand, anyone who goes to court to try to assert his right to not to wear a helmet on a motorcycle, I expect any day to go to court to assert his right to stick his tongue in an electric light socket.
Okay, Bill, here's one for you. The Philippines. Fire Defense Minister Juan Enrile calls the government of the Philippines under Corazon Aquino a dictatorship. Is the Philippines any better off with Aquino than they were under Marcos? Or is this another U.S.-supported leader that will fail at running a democracy?
Well, I think they are better off under Aquino, and I think the astonishing thing about this U.S.-supported leader is that she's not a right-wing militarist. I think she's has her heart in the right place. She's awfully green, but she's turning out to be pretty sharp for someone as green as she is, which proves once again, I think, that seasoned politicians get stuck in a rut, and somebody with a fresh approach can sometimes run a better government than someone who's been at it for 20 years.
It's like saying a person who jumped off the top of a building is better off than they were at the top simply because they haven't hit the bottom yet. She does have her heart in the right place, that's true, but she's demonstrated that she's utterly incapable of dealing with the communist army in the field, and the fighting is going to intensify, and she's not going to be long for this world. And it's unfortunate because her heart's in the right place, but she doesn't know how to handle the hardline communists, and the hardline communists know how to handle her.
Well, did Marcos know how to handle it any better?
No.
Marcos made matters worse. Marcos gave them the ammunition to use with the people of dire social conditions. She's working on those social conditions. She's working to help the poor, and she is denying the communist insurgents the ocean they swim in.
Okay, Doug, our nation's Surgeon General now says that being in the same room with someone who is smoking is definitely hazardous to your health. Why should those of us who don't smoke have to put up with this risk to our health? Shouldn't smoking be banned entirely?
This is another example of the maternalistic state stepping in and trying to settle disputes that should be settled between reasonable people all by themselves. I think that cigarette smoking is offensive to many, many people, but I think that that sort of dispute can be settled by free men and women operating on their own without the state butting in and telling people where and when they can and cannot smoke. This is supposed to be a free country.
It could be settled by dead men and women. Here's a case, unlike seat belts and motorcycle helmets, where you have people who are plainly harmed immediately and tangibly by the actions of another. And if that can't be controlled under a libertarian or any other philosophy, I don't know what can.
The principle is right. The principle says that if your actions harm another, then fine, you have the right to have that behavior
Is there any
restricted.
question that this action harms?
This second-generation cigarette smoke, I think the jury's still out on it. I think it's offensive to many people, but I don't think that it's...
Just because you don't read doesn't mean the jury's out on a question. No, seriously, I think there are some scientific studies in that you may have missed.
There are
all your time reading your right-wing tracts, you didn't get to something with some actual fact in it.
Do you have any idea how many statistical surveys and statistical reports are churned out all the time, many of them demonstrating diametrically opposed viewpoints?
Okay, throw out the scientific, not statistical. We were talking about scientific.
Right.
Just use Doug's common sense. You do, I presume, believe that smoke is harmful to the person smoking it.
Yes,
and you get in a confined space, smoke is smoke.
Just use your common sense. If someone sucks cigarette smoke into the lungs for 30 years, of course there's going to be some side effects in the health department. If someone lives in the same house with someone who chain smokes for 30 years, then there's going to be similar problems. And common sense tells you that. But to go to a restaurant where you are exposed to one cigarette every 10 years is no danger at all, and the government has no business in that sort of...
Every time you go to the restaurant, you're exposed to many cigarettes.
You don't, if a bunch of people smoke there, you don't have to go to that restaurant. Freedom works.
I'll agree with you on one thing. The only thing I hate more than cigarette smoking is anti-cigarette smokers. I've never known such a sanctimonious collection of prigs, with the possible exception of yourself and your kind. But the prigs happen to be right in this case. You know, even a stop clock is right twice a day.
Okay, enough smoke on that one. Here's the next question, Bill. January brings W-4 forms and 1040s to our mailboxes. How will this overhaul of the nation's tax code affect spending in this country? Some economists fear the decrease in deductions will cause spending to decrease, possibly causing a recession in America sometime in 1987, this new year.
Well, first of all, I just tried to go through my W-4 the other day, and as brilliant as I am, I can't figure out how to fill out the bloody thing. I'm going to have to seek professional help, something Doug has always wished I would do.
I still wish.
This tax proposal is supposed to lower most people's taxes. That gives them more spending money. That should be good for the economy. I agree with Reagan that you cut taxes a certain amount, and you pump up the economy enough to more than offset the immediate loss of revenue. But there are limits on that. If there weren't limits on that, you'd cut the taxes to 1%, and you would stimulate the economy into replacing all that lost revenue.
All that freedom out there, you just can't stand it. All these people running around, spending their own money, their own way, going into the stores they choose.
Well, what I can't stand is the thought of your beloved military running out of gas and not saving me from the Russians and the Protestants or whatever.
Doug, this question to you. Contraception advertising isn't banned, but is rarely seen on TV as it's considered an unsavory topic by many. Recently, however, primetime shows, Kate and Alley, Cagney and Lacey have approached the subject. Are people ready to see in their own homes someone else giving sexual conduct and safety advice?
The whole issue has nothing to do with contraception as such. The issue has to do with sexual morality. And it is in the interest of many people to confuse those two issues. They want to say, well, why can't we advertise contraceptives on TV? It's simply a mechanical device or a device that can be used legitimately. The point is, there is an amorality that creeps into it that says, if you're going to be sexually active, and we are not going to presume to pronounce whether this activity is right or wrong, do it this way. And that amoral suspension of judgment is the thing that I find objectionable.
People like you are going to bury us in babies. I mean, you can preach till the cows come home, and there's going to be a certain amount of those frisky little devils out there going to get into each other's genes. And I hope when they do, I won't end up supporting their illegitimate children. I do want to say one thing. Is like, if these are in bad taste, they are not alone. Because I sit there eating dinner every night watching denture goo commercials and hemorrhoid commercials and like, what's a little thing like your pain in the neck positions on birth control.
Now, the thing that's important to realize is the baby boom, the population bomb, is not nearly the danger that everybody has been talking about for the last 20 years. Now in Western Europe, in France particularly, they're trying to encourage people to have more children because the population is not replacing itself. The zero population growth people have had their way, but...
They're succeeding. They have in Japan, too. We now have 6 billion people on this tired old planet, and we had about 2.5 billion when I was born.
And the Western Europeans are finding out that simply limiting population or decreasing population is not the unmitigated benefit that it was purported to be.
You can't win that argument. I don't know how many people on this earth are too many people. Whether it's, if you think 6 billion is enough, double that.
If you believe with the socialistic, if you believe the socialists of this world who say that people are
I believe the mathematicians of this world.
If you view people as consumers, all they do is arrive and start eating, then you're going to have a problem. But if you view people as the ultimate resource, we're all born into this world with one mouth but two hands. And the thing that we have to realize is that people are fully capable, they're capable of being productive as well as being consumers. We've all seen from time to time in the newspapers, the average child consumes this many tons of beef and this many all this milk, and we look at how much they consume over 18 years. But if they're disciplined and taught and brought up correctly, they produce far more than they consume.
We're born with
they're free.
We're born with only one set of whoopee tools, too, but it produces many, many children in some families. And I don't care how many ants you think the hill can hold, just double it because the population keeps doubling. Sooner or later, it's going to get crowded.
Now, the point is...
Do you realize the way the population has been going the last 30 years? In another 30 years, if that were to keep up, you would have a place like Moscow, Idaho. It has something like 150,000 people in it.
Look.
Isn't that a frightening thought?
Yeah. Well,
I've met people from Moscow.
It depends on your view of people. If you think that people are producers and are capable of...
Boy, are they producers. That's what we're talking about, Doug.
But if they not just reproducers, but producers. The United States has 6% of the world's population, and we produce far in excess of what we consume. I think freedom works.
If every other nation had its population stabilized, if all nations had their population stabilized, I like to think they will. I like to be an optimist. Then we're in no trouble. But the fact is, you can't go on, especially in poor lands, watching the population double and the food not double and not run into problems.
The reason the food's not doubling is because they have socialist economies. They can't feed their own people, but not because they have too many people, but because they have a rotten economic system.
That's baloney. The nations of the world that are overpopulating themselves right now are a mixture of all kinds of societies.
Under the British, India exported grain. Now they can't feed their own
Moscow,
people.
Idaho's socialistic.
The
hardly the most socialist.
The Soviet Union used to supply wheat to the rest of Europe. Now they've had an unusually bad weather every year since 1970.
How about the right-wing South American governments? They're also in the overpopulation problem. Probably socialists put them up there.
They even have a new video that's coming out with the top rock star of South America singing that you can say no. You can say no to start their population.
The population problem is a question of what you do with the people you have, not how many you have. The issue is not how many.
If you don't believe it's how many you have, you don't understand the problem.
If you have a lot of people who all know how to work hard and who all know how to...
This is Northwest Public Television, KWSU-TV from Pullman.
Good evening. Welcome to Counterpoint here on KWSU-TV for Thursday, February the 12th. On this program, you'll hear from Bill Hall, who's the editorial page editor for the Lewiston Morning Tribune and generally represents the liberal views, and Doug Wilson, a Moscow minister who represents conservative views. He also writes for the Idahonian and the Daily News of Pullman. The way our program works, in case you've just joined us, you'll hear, first of all, an editorial or a commentator for each their views, and then you'll hear a response, and then later we'll have a grab bag where we'll hear different topics. But first of all, here's Bill Hall.
I think it's about time we started teaching coyote in the biology classes of America. It is time we started teaching how he and yellow jacket and bear and skunk helped prepare the earth for the arrival of humankind. We now teach the bizarre notion in the public school biology classes and in some liberal church schools that humans evolved from the lower animals. We now teach that humans ascended from the apes, if you can believe that. From coyote maybe, but surely not the apes. And there are also those who hold to the even more extraordinary notion that God created Earth and humans and all that other stuff in a scant 6 days, in the blink of a mighty eye, and then rested on the seventh, as anyone would have to after such a remarkable labor. And those who believe in that theory, the creationist theory of our coming into being, are rightly miffed that their theory is not included, along with evolution, the ape theory, in the biology classrooms of America. After all, they say, evolution is just a theory, and so a second theory should be taught right along with it, their theory, the creationist theory. And I say a third. If evolution is nothing but a theory, no better and perhaps even worse than creationism as an explanation for our existence, then one theory should be as good as another, regardless of scientific basis. And so we should also teach the theory of our friends and neighbors, the Nez Perce Indians, as to how we all came to be in this place in space and time. And that, as I loosely understand it, is that the old man created the spiritual forces, and that among them were yellow jacket, ant, bear, skunk, and the wise and revered coyote. And like the Greek gods of old, another theory worth teaching, they prepared the earth for our arrival. And then we sprang somewhat inexplicably out of nowhere, not unlike the daughters-in-law of Adam and Eve. If evolution is just another theory of how we came to be, deserving only of equal time in the public school classrooms, then so too is Christian creationism, and the Nez Perce version of how we came to be, and the Buddhist, and the Hindu, and all the others, countless in number, new worlds without end. If evolution is truly nothing more than just another theory, springing more from the heart and the imagination than from the mind, then perhaps it should have no more than equal time. If it is no more provable than all the dozens of religious explanations for the creation of the earth and its slow inhabitants, then why should it be supreme? And perhaps there should be equal time in the classroom for all the theories of our emergence, most especially including the story of wise old Coyote and his animal clan. Or do the creationists assert that Coyote and his colleagues are a simple childish notion, while the creation of Earth and us in 6 literal days is solid scientific fact? I fear that somewhere out there on the windy Nez Perce hills and plains, clever old Coyote is observing gatherings such as these, pointing his nose to the silvery moon and howling with laughter that the creatures he paved the way for have progressed no farther than this. Doug?
Well, when it comes to the teaching of evolution in government schools, public schools, I don't really have an objection. The government schools are a fitting place or a receptacle for that sort of teaching, which is just crazy. I think it was Malcolm Muggeridge who said, in retrospect, evolution will be seen as one of the great jokes of history, which is what I consider it to be. It is just a scientific insanity.
He said it in retrospect within his own life, too, because he said it when he'd become a senile old fool. Earlier in his life, he believed it.
But my question is this. If you want to teach evolution, I don't imagine why anybody would want to teach something so crazy. Next thing you'd be
crazy as Coyote.
Or teach the Earth,
or
a flat Earth, or a flat Earth on the back of a tortoise. If you want to teach that sort of thing, that's fine. But if you're going to teach evolution, why don't you teach all of it? For example, Charles Darwin, in The Descent of Man, said that the Negro and the gorilla occupied a space on the evolutionary ladder between the baboons and the civilized races. Do you think that aspect of Darwinism should be taught in our public schools?
You should